I am delighted to have us just dive straight in. B. Apple has spent the last decade deeply involved in the entrepreneur community of NWA. Founder of Pressroom, she owned and operated it in its original location for 4 years. Since then, she's helped bring several other new hospitality projects online. The Record, Preacher's Son, and revamped Pressroom in its new location on the Bentonville Square. The art installations at 8th Street Market and Sunny's. She has been operating Hillfolk with her partner Trisha since the fall of 2018. And as a little girl growing up in the Bronx, she caught the making bug early, teaching herself to knit at the age of 9 out of library books. She's most excited about using her entrepreneurial background to revive the culture of making in her hometown. Thanks so much, B. Take it away. Let's show some love to B.
Hi. Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to meet all of you guys. And I appreciate Cash, Brittany, Kelsey, y'all are great. And thank you for, giving me the opportunity to connect with other creatives working in this field. I kind of wanted to kick off this conversation and talk a little bit about my path to opening a creative business. It was kind of I feel like my story brings a lot of encouragement to people who are creative because my path was very non-traditional. Like Kelsey said, I grew up in the Bronx. I was the daughter of Korean immigrants, and my mother died at a young age, and, was raised by my dad in a very challenging environment in, the 80s and the 90s in New York City. But what that experience taught me was a lot of resourcefulness and, the importance of community engagement and just trying new things. As a child, I taught myself, out of these books. This was before the internet, before cell phones were widely accessible. And, when you're just a kid kind of like navigating life in a tough environment, sometimes your public library is the best resource to find creativity, find community and inspiration. I really gravitated towards making just because I resonated with the stories and the traditions of people who have had to do a lot of things with very little. There's so much creativity that's involved in that process. And, art and craft is one of those things that you can do in the city, when you don't have a lot of access to outdoor space or after school programs or that kind of thing. So that was kind of, the genesis of this deep passion inside of me to ultimately create spaces, doesn't matter what they are, that are safe, nurturing environments for people to kind of do creative expression. I had to put those dreams down. I ended up moving to Arkansas in 1993. My family that I came to live with, my aunt and my uncle, they were part of the first wave of Korean immigrants that moved to Arkansas in the early 80s and 90s to work in the poultry industry. And when you're the child of immigrants and navigating society in the South, sometimes you got to put those creative dreams down because of the expectations and the economic challenges that faced us. I was so passionate about art. I loved to draw and paint, and ended up doing a lot of that stuff in high school. And my ultimate dream was to go to art school. And and I'm sure a lot of y'all know, is like, there's tons of systemic barriers to kind of have that traditional track through art school. It's really expensive to apply to art school. And this was pre-internet. So like, if you had a portfolio, you had to ship your portfolio to an art school, you have to pay application fees. And, my parents, their biggest goal for me was survival. And, they pushed me towards STEM, and, it was either I'm going to be a lawyer or a doctor. I ended up picking engineering because, I knew the realities of the choices that I was going to have to make. But, through kind of my heartbreak about giving up this dream for art school, I had the chance to go to a U2 concert in Memphis my senior year of high school, and it was my first big concert. And I was sitting in the audience and had bought one of the tour booklets. And in the book, I read a line about the lighting displays that these engineers had created for this massive music tour. And in that moment, it was like a flash of lightning where I was like, and I'll probably get emotional, but like, it was like a flash of lightning where I was like, I can pursue this tech career and I can still figure out how to nurture my creative spirit in a different way for now. The overarching theme of my career has been things are changing all the time. As a young engineer kind of navigating that trade, I started out in Connecticut and worked at a submarine base. That was my first job out of college. I worked, with all kinds of trades, and that whole aspect of my career was so valuable to me because I learned so much about hands-on experience from a whole like smorgasbord of people, from like shipyard workers who, were union electrician guys and carpenters and painters building submarines in Connecticut. I worked with, high level engineering. I had a top secret clearance to try and do all this stuff. And it taught me the value of every kind of layer in the ecosystem of anything, and we see this in arts and culture is, there's all different layers to kind of creating a healthy and thriving environment to kind of nurture creative expression wherever that is. And it takes people who are really good with their hands. It takes people who are really good with organizing. My whole experience in engineering taught me that creative expression is not just about, kind of like this narrow definition of like, I'm creating art that hangs on a gallery, or, is a sculpture piece that hangs on a shelf, but it's really just more kind of a way of thinking that's adaptable, that leverages community engagement and connections with other people and people outside of your field, people outside of your office, because, you can find inspiration for creative thought in any place. So fast forward, I'm in this process, I have kids and, kind of navigating motherhood as an engineer. And then in 2011, my ex-husband and we had the opportunity to open up the press room. And, in my time, like as a cubicle warrior, I continue to nurture my creative hobbies. I think the importance of hobbies, especially when you're building your career as a 20-something, as a teenager, as a 20-something year old. I got a lot of flack from people because I was like I have rabbit holes. My life is consisted of multiple rabbit holes, whether it be knitting. I mean, y'all, one summer I worked at a yo-yo and kite store in Huntington Beach while I was interning. I was interning out in California, working for another defense contractor. This is when I was still in college. And I got really good at yo-yos. I have done all kinds of things in my career, and I have nurtured hobbies like my continued obsession with painting and crafting and stitching. I have gotten into cycling, cooking. In my years before I opened up Press Room, I learned how to cook at home. And if people know me now, they're like, it's hard to imagine a time where I wasn't passionate about food, but I got into learning about food systems. I read all kinds of books. I allowed myself the time to go off into these rabbit holes, even if there was never any guarantee that I was going to be able to monetize this at some point down the road. And that ended up all actually working for me when the opportunity to open Press Room dropped in my lap. there in that situation, I was able to leverage my experience as an engineer and doing problem solving to design a new space, to pull together a food menu that I pulled on, kind of my experience, like working at home with like recipes and cooking for my family. And then leveraged, staff and my ex-husband's business development experience to kind of work on kind of the more nuts and bolts aspects of business development, which that was my first exposure. So kind of every experience that I've had has like launched itself into the next phase of my life, and it was totally unplanned. And when I opened up Press Room and realized that I could use that space as an outlet for my creative expression, worked on recipes. It was, one of the first, actually it was the first restaurant in downtown Bentonville to, proudly display Black artists. We like really worked on creating an inclusive environment in the space. We've always tried to, and it meant something in that time in 2011 when we were first opening. I was trying to pull from all of my experiences growing up in the city, but also growing up in Arkansas. And that in itself is a creative endeavor, trying to figure out how to take all those different threads of my life experience and tie it into something that I felt like could serve the community, but also be an expression of who I was. And I think, as I've transitioned out of my 20s into my 30s, and now I'm 42, I have developed a lot of pride around my experience, and have understood that even the times where I felt like I was failing and making mistakes and kind of like, falling off of the typical path that was laid out for me, I've realized that just being open to leveraging our learnings as human beings into creative ways to push back against this like crazy, insane, fast, go culture that we're doing. That's very, that can be monolithic and exclusive, and really focus on creating safe spaces. Like ultimately, ever since my whole career has been about creating safe spaces. And I've realized that in my 40s through a lot of therapy, that ultimately I'm using my childhood and adult experiences to heal myself and to heal my community and to do things for other young people and other adults like myself who, maybe didn't have those resources as kids, but know so deeply how important those are to like kind of living a thriving life. Yeah, so that's kind of like background, and I wanted to talk about all that only because like so much of that informs kind of what we're doing at Hillfolk. And if you're not familiar with Hillfolk, my partner Trisha Logan and we opened it up in 2018, and I wanted to create a safe, fun, collaborative, creative, like cool, hip environment for young people of all ages to get into crafting, into making, into doing things with their hands. And, I started crying about this because I was doing another interview for somebody, and we were talking about why it was so important to me to kind of develop this space, and like to go back to my story as a 9-year-old in the Bronx trying to teach myself how to knit. Like it's a cool story in the sense that like it showcases the resilience of a little girl living in the city without a lot of resource to like kind of teach herself to do this thing. But the bittersweet flip side to that is like all kids deserve to have a nurturing environment to learn how to do these things, and I like to tell my story not as a way to say, hey, I jumped through all of these hurdles, you should be able to. I tell my story as a way to say, I went through these hurdles, and where I could have been if I had had the resources to be creative, to experience community, to experience that like one-on-one connection with somebody when you're learning from them, and having that feedback loop of like, I'm going to try something, but I'm going to be supported through my mistakes. It's so transformational to us as human beings, to kids, to just having a healthy community, and being able to connect with people. So I say that to say that, like, for me, like, so much of the role, and because of my non-traditional path towards having a creative business, has been informed by my life, by my unique experiences. And I think that's what is missing a lot in spaces around creativity, is that I am really passionate about encouraging people to dig into their own life stories as a way to kind of figure out what is that special something that, because of my unique talent, whether it's, the culture that I grew up with, the food that I eat, the customs that we have around gathering. There's so many beautiful aspects of our experience in this world. And we're entering into a time culturally, socially, politically, where the world needs us to lean into our most authentic selves in order to move towards, a society that is open and accepting of all people, and creating environments, so to nurture future generations. I think about this a lot in terms of like my role as a parent, and how like being a mom has really healed me, because again, as I'm in the process of mothering my children, I'm also mothering myself. And then at Hillfolk, I've created this environment where we have like a really amazing staff. We've worked really hard to try and communicate to our staff that the experience that we want to create for our customers is one that is engaging and warm and meant to support you through kind of like an ongoing craft journey. And all that's based in, I didn't go to school for marketing. I didn't go to school for communications, but my life experience as an engineer, as someone who's had to advocate for myself and for my needs a lot of times on my own, communication and marketing, it's so important to that, because fundamentally it's about like knowing who you are as a human being and being able to tell that story in a million different ways, whether it's through I think especially when in nonprofit, let me just say this too. I think in nonprofits and in creative businesses, like once things become official, it's really easy to get wrapped up in the idea of like, well, I don't want to release something unless it's perfect. And I don't remember who said this quote, but perfection is the death of creativity. Creativity is fundamentally about trying things and being vulnerable enough with yourself, and grounded enough in your worth to know that these things that I create, they are beautiful and wonderful just because they exist. And it is the process of the doing that helps us extract the best and deepest and most real kind of like essence of who we are and how we're going to be operating in the society, in our world, in our community, and with each other. But yeah. Does anybody have any questions? I know it's a lot.
Several things. I'm like, B quotes. You say perfection is the death of creativity.
Yeah.
I'm putting it in there for the record. Yeah, I got a couple questions in the chat, and also just wanted to point out Jeffrey's comment earlier. Mm-hmm. Jeffrey had said that it really resonates thinking about this sort of non-traditional arts path, and also recognizing and fostering a creativity in jobs like as an engineer on a plane.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do you feel like part of the need for community nurturing of creativity is in recognizing the creativity in non-traditional art jobs? Does that
Oh, 100%, 100%. You know, like when you're, again, this is something that has been informed by, you know, my upbringing and my life experience. You know, when you grow up without a nuclear family to support you, you very quickly learn that you cannot survive in this world without community and good neighbors, you know. And I took that into the workplace. And I didn't even know what I was doing. I was 21 when I graduated college and started my first engineering job. And looking back on that, I remember just how much of a baby I was. But I think intuitively I knew that my my general spirit and posture towards how I was engaging in the work setting was to be as curious as I possibly could. Um, Number one, because, you know, I genuinely was there to learn. And I think also I also felt the pressure of, you know, kind of being the expression of the dreams of my parents, you know, stepping out into this new, you know, I was the first, you know, my parents were college grads in Korea, but because of the language barrier and being, you know, Korean War refugees and all of that, you know, they were excluded from those types of jobs when they moved to America. So, you know, it's a big deal for me to become an engineer. And I felt a lot of pressure and wanted to do the best that I could, but was also very intimidated by my environment. But, you know, I think growing up in intimidating environments, it kind of like really burned out of me any sort of ego, um, and just helped me be in a real put myself in a vulnerable spot in terms of like I'm okay to look stupid if I ask a dumb question, even though I don't believe there's any dumb questions. Yeah, so, and I think, but if you look at what that is fundamentally, like vulnerability and bridge building and relationship building, those are like such key ingredients to kind of having a human experience. You know, this capitalist, like super high, high speed environment it isolates from each other. And I think it creates all sorts of like problems, you know, further on down the road once you kind of like get out of, you know, especially if you haven't grown up with a lot, you just know that you got to have community. And that community comes from family, that community comes from the people that you work with. And I always struggled with drawing boundaries between like, you know, my work life and my professional life sometimes because I'm so passionate about what I do. And I also want to love where I work. And I want to have good relationships with the people that I work with that, you know, I kind of like get into, you know, sometimes I'm like, all right, I have to draw a line, you know, that my staff, they work for me. You know, I need to like make sure I'm drawing boundaries. And part of that is like my own healing journey and like, you know, learning how to value my own time as a woman, as, you know, as a mother and learning how to prioritize. And that, you know, that's something, it's the logistical aspects. If I had infinite energy, I would be I would be even more all over the place than I am right now.
Well, and like being your authentic self and having a healthy, effective team, it's hard for those things to coexist sometimes. It takes a lot of intentionality. But I mean, you've talked a lot about being your authentic self. And there's a good question, Brittany, you actually put it in the chat just about how that authenticity balances with your interaction with the community.
Mm-hmm.
How does Hillfolk figure out the best and consistent communication to be authentic as a business, but also to, Brittany, as you said it, to meet your community where they're at? How do you engage with your community in an authentic and consistent way for Hillfolk?
Yeah, that is such a good question, and I think I'll have more answers after I attend that Interform session on next week. um,
Just the
you
extra
know,
plug. Yeah.
um,
Right.
I think it's something that I think number one, I think we have to um reconcile ourselves with the fact that authenticity, especially if it's tied to the thing that is your livelihood, is a thing that you have to wrestle with on a decision on a case by case basis. And I think you also have to look at the various channels and outlets you have for the particular information that you're getting out and figure out which of those outlets make the most sense to put out the information that you need to put out. And I think, a really good example is, for us, socially speaking, Hillfolk has tried to be on the more vocal end of talking about issues that face our community. And it's something that, Trish and I early on, um, we tried to use our social media platform as a tool to kind of talk about issues. And then also with the recognition that craft in our society, quilting bees, stitch and bitches, social circles around making, they have always been historical places of cultural ideas and societal change. You look at civil rights movements all throughout that have been led by women of color, white women all across the world. And those conversations happen in places where women and other marginalized people are sitting around and doing things like making things together. Um, so we've employed a number of strategies over the years. It's sometimes we talk about major issues on social media and try to leverage and uplift other artists who are doing that work as a way to kind of use our platform to talk about things, because sometimes it's hard, being real straight up, it's hard to talk about some of these issues, especially, when you're trying to navigate your business through a pandemic and are worried about some of the public stances that you might take and how that's going to affect your bottom line. And, again, perfectionism doesn't exist, and there's no one right way to answer that question, except, um, as a business owned by two women who are navigating this pandemic and trying to figure out how to make a retail store work, in the land of the world's biggest retailer in a town that's, is not necessarily the size that it needs to be to make it financially, like viable 100% of the time. Figuring out those ways that we can connect with the community. And so that's what we've really been focusing on in the last couple of years, as Trish and I have gotten really exhausted with kind of the ups and downs of navigating our business through all of these challenges, and have really found that using our space to kind of host gatherings, to have conversations, can oftentimes be a really effective way, number one, to talk about the things that you're passionate about, to find other like-minded people who are in this with you, and to help build relationships and collaborative ideas for kind of like the next phase of growth. Um, because and I think that's, I love the saying of letting 1,000 flowers bloom. I love the idea of lots of dispersed ideas that are quick and easy to implement and leverage partnerships and relationships that we've just kind of built authentically to kind of help us kind of get things done or create a bigger impact. Even some of the work that that I do on the nonprofit side around cycling advocacy, like we found a lot of power in the ability to stand with other nonprofit organizations and talk about issues together. That's the other thing, coalition building, and again, creating space for meeting other creatives who work at all different levels, you know, finding intersections between other types of business models, and really uplifting the creative process that happens in all of those different spaces, and bringing people together to talk about things. And you know, what are those direct action items that, you know, we can work on together? Because it is, you know, as a business, it's a lot less scary to like talk about hard issues if, you know, you're doing it in community with other people, and you've kind of helped develop relationships and authenticity with each other. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's, I think, you know, it's trying a lot of things again, you know, navigating these years that has required a lot of creativity and partnership, but none of us are meant to go through this on our own. We need to rely on each other to network our resources, to be in communication with each other, so that we're not duplicating work, so that we're helping boost each other's missions, because fundamentally we're all here for the same reason. You know, we want to boost this creative economy. We want to legitimize the creative field as a real path to success and to financial stability. And I think, you know, we also have to recognize that the issues facing artists and nonprofit organizations, like we need to do coalition building in order to talk about, as a larger body of collective voices, the issues that are facing artists and creatives today. Like we cannot ignore that climate change, racism, housing are issues that deep, you know, ability to get from point A to point B without spending a gazillion dollars on gas. These all have a direct impact on our ability to function in the world as artists and creatives, and to be able to kind of pursue our passions. Because when we're too busy just trying to survive, you know, we're not doing the work of co-creating the society that we want to live in 5, 10 years, 15, 20 years from now.
Yes, and that comes with a requirement to be committed to not see each other just as competition, but that if we build coalitions together, that we're enriching and making a more sustainable future for the arts sector here where we live together, right? So before, we've got some good questions in the chat that are brewing. Hello to those who just popped on. Good to see you. We're just talking with Bea about her life experience that has informed the ways that she's created really thriving creative businesses. So before we go into more questions, I would love to pause and find out who's in the Zoom room here with us today. So if you could just put in the chat either what your creative business is that you're affiliated with or that you own perhaps, and or an organization that you're affiliated with, and or your creative practice as an artist. So let's just see who's in the room today, and that can kind of maybe help be with the kind of discussion that we continue having. And while y'all are putting your information in the chat, Brittany had a good question, so I'll pass it over to you, Brittany.
Yeah. So I was just curious, since you've lived in so many different places all over the country, how do you find Northwest Arkansas in terms of owning a business, creating a thriving business? Are there unique sort of challenges and or surprising benefits to being here in Northwest Arkansas?
It is there's no place like this place. It is I'm going to talk about the good stuff first, because there's so much good stuff and there's so much opportunity, and is why I'm still here after 30 plus years. and I was talking about this with my friend Kim yesterday. We have the opportunity to create, and I think of this, I love this analogy, and I was talking about it this way, so pardon me, I'm going to go a little bit down a rabbit hole with this, but I really see us, and all of us in this room, as that first wave of creative entrepreneurial folks who are helping to build the soil for a thriving ecosystem in Northwest Arkansas. The timing of, the Walton Family Foundation's grant to the U of A, the investment in the museums, the investment in these nonprofit orgs to continue to nurture that environment that is conducive to growing, creating, and ultimately getting to financial stability, a whole host of different businesses, whether it's galleries, whether it's, just the ability to freelance your art, the ability to do all kinds of stuff. We are in the very lucky position to help drive that direction in a really big, meaningful, and important way. And I think that is really, really exciting. And I think there is so much untapped potential that exists within our communities. The other piece to this that I think is so incredible is not only do we have the chance to leverage, millions and millions of dollars in investment in the creative economy of Northwest Arkansas, we have the opportunity as artists and creatives to advocate for the type of society that can nurture this creative ecosystem. We all know that, we are in a time of like upheaval and a lot of change within all of our communities, and Arkansas is no exception. And there is such a huge opportunity to leverage, all of that investment. We are building culture here. We're building it one meeting at a time. We are building it one friendship at a time, one relationship at a time. And because we're on the ground floor, that really means something. It's easy to go to a big city and see things that are established and see these economies and think, we're never going to be there. But we are here right now. And the reality is it's going to take a lot of scrappiness. It's going to take a lot of coalition building. It's going to take a lot of networking with each other and brainstorming creative ideas for us to kind of help push social issues to the forefront and make sure that we're building a creative economy that's not just good for a few people, but for good for a lot of people. And you add that into, the infrastructure investments around trails and access to the outdoors. Like this, Arkansas could be a mecca, a beautiful, a lot of people that, they might look at me and they might, look at my background or my politics or the things that I say and think that she must hate it here. I don't. I love it here. I am passionate about this state. I am passionate about this community. I am endlessly inspired by the work of our ancestors in this place that have fought so hard to get where we are right now. Arkansas has such a deep, rich history of music and art. We got Maya Angelou, we have Rosetta Tharpe, we have Johnny Cash. We should be so proud of the state that we're from, and we should be so proud of the opportunity to create what we have to create. With that said, the flip side to all of this is, we're existing in an ecosystem that goes 1 million miles a second, and it's exhausting to exist inside of it. Because, and part of this are things that I'm learning as a nonprofit working in the bike advocacy space and really becoming intimate with the ways in which, the nonprofit system here especially is very challenged. Because a lot of these nonprofits are not set up to work with each other. The culture is not, the culture is based on competition and, leveraging as much volunteer support as possible. And, if you look at the boards of these nonprofits, and if you look at leadership in these nonprofits, the diversity is not where it needs to be. And I think, again, as we're kind of advocating and coalition building as a group, there's a lot of opportunity to push for change, the kind of change that we want to see. But it's exhausting. It is exhausting. We are dealing with a machine. And it's really easy to get caught up in it, and it's really easy to burn yourself out. And we need to not be burning ourselves out, because the work that we're doing is long-term work. And so that's why I'm so passionate about, again, coalition building, sharing the load, figuring out creative ways to leverage each other's creative identities to kind of do authentic storytelling. I went to Jeffrey's art installation at Black Apple Crossing a couple weeks ago, and I loved hearing his story, and I loved his use of found materials, and I love the way he worked with Arts One, and collaborated with Roxy, and it's just that kind of relationship building and storytelling is so magical to creating the society that we want to create, because I cannot impress enough the importance of getting our stories out there and just being visible and taking up space. In a society that wants to erase a lot of us with marginalized identities, just being here is a feat. Me being here with everything that I've grown up with, and all of kind of the ups and downs of my childhood and my adult life, me being here is like a miracle. And I would say that for every single person sitting in this room. And it's I want to know more of those stories. I want us to be talking about it with each other, and I want to figure out how we can help each other in a more consistent way.
The theme that keeps coming up is authenticity for your creative business and for yourself is part of what's required for a thriving creative business. And then I also just heard you say, and that we have to tell that story. Was there a moment with Hill Folk specifically where you felt like that campaign or that shift in our branding, I feel like we just really effectively communicated our authentic, thriving business?
Yes. I can't talk about that specific project yet. But I will say I was putting together a pitch deck for my project, and part of that pitch deck, I realized that I would have to be vulnerable enough to tell my story, and I just did it this summer. So it was I was in a room and I'm presenting to these folks, and talking about and the sentence that I said was, Hill Folk is the space that I would have needed as a 9-year-old. And that was it right there. That was it. It was such an emotional moment for me, like a real watershed moment where, if you grow up in a challenging environment and what my therapist used to call big T trauma, it's really hard to look sometimes at your past and reconcile yourself with the pain and the beauty of it. Especially when you're in the throes of raising your children and trying to break generational cycles of abuse, especially in immigrant communities. It is something that, I've worked really hard to overcome. And it was in that moment that I just my ex-mother-in-law, and we're still friends, she used to say this to me, and it was it felt cheesy in the time that she was saying this to me, but it's so true, is that when you're painting a painting, you've got your dark shadows and you've got the light, and it's all part of the same story, and it makes it even more rich, and it makes it even more beautiful. And especially if you have the resources and the time to be able to dive into doing that healing work. And it's why I'm so passionate again about craft, access to the outdoors, therapy, community building, it is because that is the toolkit for diving into your most authentic self and learning to create things out of that. Because I think for a long time, and I know I'm getting super personal on here, that's just how I am, but like, for a long time, I was afraid to kind of really have a real look at my past. Because I was afraid if I started to like really look at, my life experiences, I would be overcome with grief and I would not be able to get up. And I knew that, when you're just trying to like, you're grinding through the day and you're just trying to raise your kids and do your job, it's really hard to like care enough for yourself and, marshal up the financial and time resources it takes to kind of do that type of work. So I fully recognize that, like, in the last couple of years, I've, been somewhat privileged to be able to do that work, but it's allowed me to tap into my feelings in a much deeper way, which again, there's a lot of sadness and there's grief there, but I've been able to experience a capacity for joy that I also did not have before. It is the overall stretching of myself, and my ability to sit with, the very difficult, hard aspects of myself as a human being and the things that I've experienced and the things that I will continue to experience, because life goes on and, there are upcoming challenges ahead, but then also be able to fully give myself up to joyful experiences in community, in, authentic relationships with other people. I keep going back to that. But then ultimately come back to a sense of groundedness within myself, within my understanding of my own value as a human being, just because I'm here. And letting go of, the requirements for respectability or how to show up in a space or what are you supposed to wear or, any of those things. Most of my childhood, as a child, when you're trying to fit in and find love, you are so desperate to pursue those things that sometimes you give up pieces of yourself. And over the years, I've like worked to reclaim all of those aspects of me to be able to like move forward in a whole way. It's a process.
Well, and the process too, you just said it, staying grounded in your values. Something that has come up over and over again in the sessions this week, as many of you know, because you've been in multiple sessions in Comms Week, has been staying grounded in your values and knowing who you are, whether you're a business, an artist, or a nonprofit. And just wondering, the things that you've been talking about, I realize have so much in common with some of the conversations that we've been having about nonprofits. That nonprofits have so much passion. There is so much meaning to convey. How do you narrow down those grounding values? And we've had the fortunate experience of having over an hour with you. But for a customer or a prospective customer of Hillfolk, do you have some kind of messaging framework that grounds you and your team to make sure that you are conveying your authentic Hillfolk selves all the time and what you do? Do you have something like that grounds you and your team?
Radical honesty with ourselves and with each other. I work really hard to cultivate a safe space at the shop. That is my baby. And I recognize that in order to create safe space for my 9-year-old version, I need to create a safe space for my employees, because I can't do one without the other. My employees need to feel safe in order for customers to feel safe. I need to nurture an environment of care, authenticity, and vulnerability. And so, just some real specific ways that I do that with my staff. And I know, and, again, my path was non-traditional. I'm not always communicating through like Slack or email, but like, or having weekly staff meetings. That's the part of my, journey as an entrepreneur that I am really working on, is the organizational and like the process side of it. But the way that I handle that with my staff is I'm really open with them. A lot of people come to me and like enjoy working at Hillfolk because and when they come in, they also feel mothered. We talk about all kinds of stuff. We talk about boys, we talk about, what's going on with our menstrual cycle that week. You know what I mean? Like we talk about all kinds of stuff. And I try and create a space where young women, young people in general can come in and be vulnerable. And sometimes it starts with the way that I talk about myself. When I come into the shop, I'm real. We text. We have group chats where we feel uncomfortable enough with each other to share the sadness and the joys of, kind of our individual lives. And I try to do as much as I can to create space for flexible schedules. That's another thing that, in terms of a structure that I've set up for the shop, is I'm not relying on any one employee to kind of do the bulk of the work, but have, invested a little bit more into, paying for, 2 staff people to be there part-time, so that I have more of a backup system, so that like my employees, if they have to call in sick, or, if they need to take a day off, that we're flexible enough. It looks like, one of the women that I work with, she just had a baby and she still wants to stay involved. And, I'm running a small business, so I got to figure out, what's the financially, feasible way for me to pay this payroll, but then like still keep this really talented person at least somewhat involved in kind of the workflow. And so she's doing newsletters and she's doing it from home. And so just trying to be flexible in the ways that we work. And then just being really open to my staff and letting them know that I'm a safe place for them to kind of like talk about their issues, or, connect and get advice.
This came up a lot just in this morning's session, talking about how you often forget, whether you're a nonprofit business or artist, you have to have healthy and safe internal communication in order to have consistent and effective external communication. Mm-hmm. So my last question, and I'm serious, I'm gonna like start calling on folks. I'm turning it over to y'all. Just very briefly, do you have any tips, just advice in general, mm-hmm. for your external communications? How do you make sure that you have consistent communication to your audience, to the public?
It's like a multi-pronged strategy, and I have multiple people working on it. And if you don't have staff, if it's just you on your own, I think in terms of like diversifying your channels, and being open to trying new channels of communication. Again, it's a creative, iterative process. So, over the years of me running social media accounts, Pressroom was like one of the first this is in 2011. We were one of the first businesses in downtown Bentonville to actually post, a soup of the day every day. And that, I know that seems, just like so insignificant now, but you look at restaurant Instagram accounts and it's totally different. But that was, back then, deciding, okay, Instagram's kind of the new ground that we need to cover. I'm going to focus on this channel. And then for us recently, it's been TikTok. And it's, for me, the way that I think about it is, again, segmenting my audience and thinking about, okay, I have a demographic of, older people who are on Facebook, and I'm going to be communicating with them about class offerings via email and Facebook events, because that's that particular audience. And then, Instagram, again, staying on top of the different tools, and because they've evolved over time and the features have changed over time. So, doing my best. Again, this is hard because it's like, there's only so many given hours in a day. But again, this is where things like working with cash, and in my nonprofit work, connecting with other communications officers and understanding the tools that they're using. Like I just learned about Sprout this year, which is an online platform for posting, so it's just being curious enough to like try the tools, ask people. And then TikTok, it was just the willingness to go off and jump into another social media platform and just figure it out. And then don't underestimate your young audience. That is I will say that is the thing about TikTok that has really kind of reinforced, but also illuminated the power that teenagers have right now in our culture. This is where everything is going. And I think also raising my own teenagers made me realize that they learn so quickly. Like their adaptivity to new technology, new ways of speaking, they're so far ahead of where I was when I was that age. So that's kind of been my latest thing, is like figuring that part of it out, and figuring out how to navigate that world. Again, asking a lot of questions, leveraging some of the resources that I have here locally. I'm working with Venture Noir on entrepreneurship stuff and using them as a resource. I have in my work, consulting and all that kind of stuff, like I've been able to have a list of people that if I've got a specific question about one thing or another, I can ask them, how are you guys doing this? And, what do you guys recommend? But what I'm also finding is that artists and creatives have a leg up, and especially young people have a leg up on this because, legacy nonprofits and kind of older run institutions, they are really behind the curve because they usually cannot move quickly, and cannot adapt very well. And I think that's where smaller nonprofits, if you're a freelancer, if you're an artist, that is your strength. And how do you play to your strength? Your strength is that you can make changes on a dime. You can just decide for yourself, hey, I want to try and figure out how to do something on TikTok, and then go do it. When you're working within a nonprofit, when you're working within an organization, you have to jump through all types of hoops and make your case. And that is very valuable in your career, because you also have to have that skill to be able to sell whatever thing it is that you need to do, whether it's to your team, to your boss, or to the public at large. But if you're doing stuff on your own, you got the freedom, and TikTok is, whatever platform it is, they're just out there. And the amount of online resources that are available to kind of help support you are really super powerful. And then I think the last thing that I would say is don't limit yourself to the type of communication or the subject matter of what it is that you're talking about. Because to my earlier point about how nonprofits and creatives need to be at the forefront of kind of helping to co-create this new worlds that we're going to be stepping into, we need to give ourselves the grace and the freedom to talk about not just the things that are specific to our mission and to our business, but also speak to creating the ecosystem at large that we want to see. There are all sorts of ways to connect with people in other fields. And I will say, I'll use the cycling advocacy as an example. In 2021 in 2020 we started operating as an initiative with Trailblazers to diversify and expand access to cycling in the Northwest Arkansas region. And what I found in that is that all of these kind of big quality of life initiatives that are happening in Northwest Arkansas specifically, they are all looking for engagement from other sectors of this nonprofit community. And so leveraging kind of the different needs, again, it's all goes back to quality of life, and it all goes back to the ways that we can show up for each other. Because, even with Bike POC, we've created some interesting hybrids around the type of event that we're having. And that's allowed us to build connections with people that we normally wouldn't even be able to engage with, because we're showing up as volunteers for an organization that may not be completely aligned with our mission, but they intersect. And so I think it's like figuring out those intersections that you might have with other quality of life initiatives. I would say, housing is a huge push. Active transportation is a huge push. Food insecurity. There are so many other, and there's so many great ways to get involved, whether it's like showing up to an event, going to a networking thing, doing meetups, coming on a bike ride, going to a workshop, shoot, even like our bi-weekly craft nights at Hillfolk. You would be surprised at who walks in. And that is the other thing that is super positive about being in Northwest Arkansas. You never know who you're going to be sitting next to, and you never know. Like, I will also say, as a really positive thing about Northwest Arkansas is, and as a way to encourage the importance of, sorry, that's my dog. Let me close my door real quick. Hey y'all, I'm in a meeting. Sorry. So like, let me just say that and it's something that I love about this community, and it's something that I'm so grateful for, is most of the work that I've done and the connections that I've been able to make, it wasn't because I was sitting in some fancy room and somebody said, oh, B is the person that you need to talk to. For the 4 years that I ran Press Room, I was bussing tables, serving people coffee, bringing out their breakfasts, and having conversations with them on a one-on-one basis. But I just showed up. And so like everything that y'all see me doing right now, it all started from the relationships that I built at a restaurant, and yes, I ran the restaurant, but again, this also goes back to my philosophy of, how I'm working on teams. I did everything. People saw me have a baby. They saw me not be afraid to like get down in there with the baristas. I would be in the kitchen working with my staff. I just showed up, so never underestimate the importance of showing up, because that's the amazing thing about being in Bentonville is if you show up and you're in the rooms where other people are and things are happening, you're going to meet people, and that you're going to meet people who are passionate about helping you and who want to this is Iris. So yeah, and that would never happen in LA or New York or Austin, but it happens all the time in Bentonville. So it is an amazing thing about this community.
I wasn't about to interrupt all of that sage wisdom from you. We have just a few minutes left, and I'd love to see in the chat. I've got another little kid coming as well. You're in good company. If you could put in the chat, everybody, something that's going to stick with you from today's talk. What is a topic that you want to keep exploring? What's something that B said today that we just have been discussing that's going to stick with you? I kept putting quotes of what you were saying. So scroll through the chat if you want a quick recap of all the topics that we've talked through in just the last hour. So go ahead and put that in the chat. Appreciate you all engaging. I don't see any questions in the chat because I think we were all just pretty enraptured with what you were saying. So Brittany, if you could pull up the slides just to kind of close us out, that would be great. Because we just want to encourage everybody. It's like what you said, it's about coalition building. It's about seeking out those intersections, seeking out where there are dovetailing values and goals so that we can give ourselves, I think you said, the grace and freedom to create the ecosystem that we want to see. So let's stay in touch. We have the Cache Arkansas Community Calendar, and we, several of you have heard Brittany and I talk about this, that we are, yes, absolutely, Andrea. I hope that's how you pronounce your name. And with the calendar, we heard you that it was a little clunky, and now there's a lot more power for you to be in control of the edits on your events, and you don't have to wait for the cash team to approve. So it's a lot less cumbersome for you to have additions on the calendar to tell your story. Like what we were saying, you have to tell your story about what events you've got going on. Directory, please stay tuned. We're revamping that. We want to give you all a way to connect with each other and find each other, find those intersections. And please, please, please make sure that you are signed up for the cash newsletter if you haven't already. And there's a lot more YOLO to come, lots more. And we have a lot more sessions and a lot more conversations for artists, for creative businesses, for nonprofits. So please stay up to date on our website.